Hello and welcome back everyone. Today we're here to talk about what just may very well be the weirdest comic adaptation of all time. A movie that wasn't afraid to put Oscar winners like Al Pacino and Dustin Hoffman in some of the most grotesque and insane makeup ever used in a movie. A movie that is unafraid of its source material and strives to replicate the look of 1930s comic strips as closely as it can. That's right, today we are talking about 1990's Dick Tracy. So Dick Tracy was directed by and stars Warren Beatty, alongside Madonna, Al Pacino, and Dustin Hoffman, just to name a few. The movie also features a score by Danny Elfman, who was fresh off doing the Batman soundtrack, and boy can you hear it. And also features 5 original songs written by Broadway legend Stephen Sondheim, because this movie is secretly like 40% a musical. And seriously, this is not only one of the weirdest comic adaptations of all time, but one of the weirdest movies of all time. It feels completely detached from the era it was made in every single way. Much like The Rocketeer and The Shadow, which we talked about a few weeks ago, Dick Tracy was greenlit during the Great Batman race of 1989, where every studio tried to launch their own pulpy franchise. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, Hollywood is incapable of learning the correct lesson when a movie hits big. After Batman came out, all of the studios rushed to find their next pulp adventure hero. Rather than look to other comics from DC or even Marvel, they looked to old pulp adventure characters from the 30s and 40s. But what really sets Dick Tracy apart from all these other pulp hero movies of the early 1990s is the look of the movie. And that's primarily because Beatty insisted that the film stick with the same color palette used in the original comic strip, and focusing primarily on just 4 colors: red, green, blue, and obviously yellow. And Dick Tracy isn't the only comic book adaptation to try and imitate the style of its source material as closely as possible. I mean, just look at 300 and Sin City for examples. But because those movies rely so heavily on computer-generated backgrounds, they end up looking more like a video game than they do a traditional movie. And even though Zack Snyder and Robert Rodriguez essentially used Frank Miller's source material as their storyboards, neither of them even came close to replicating the pulpy beauty found within these comics. But Dick Tracy leans into it, playing with vibrant colors and moody noir-influenced lighting. And before we go any further, I feel like I should tell you guys, even though I had seen Dick Tracy before, I hadn't seen it in about 25 years before starting to work on this video. It just felt like the right time to revisit it. So how did this movie come to be, and what is its legacy? The character of Dick Tracy was created in 1931 by Chester Gould, and he made his premiere in the pages of the Detroit Mirror and was quickly syndicated around the country to other newspapers. And I mean, the setup for the comic strip is pretty simple. Dick Tracy is a tough, smart, renowned detective, and he fights the mob in his city, going up against bad guys like Alphonse Big Boy Caprice, Flat Top, Pruneface, Lips Manless, and other silly named bad guys that also look as ridiculous as these motherfuckers do. Anyway, since his creation in 1931, Dick Tracy has gone through a number of iterations and adaptations, making his way from comic strips to comic books and novels and radio shows, a couple of film adaptations from RKO in the 1940s, and then finally, in 1990, we got Warren Beatty's masterpiece? Anyway, Beatty apparently had an idea for a Dick Tracy adaptation as far back as 1975, and from then until the movie was released, it was constantly shuffling through writers, directors, and stars. Just for the fun of it, here's a long list of people that were at one point attached to work on or in talks to work on Dick Tracy: Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, John Landis, Clint Eastwood, Walter Hill, Joel Silver, Harrison Ford, Tom Selleck, and Mel Gibson. And in 1985, Warren Beatty finally just said fuck it and bought the rights to Dick Tracy himself from Tribune Media. Isn't that fucking crazy that we used to live in a time where not every character was owned by a major corporation? What's really crazy though is that to this day, Warren Beatty still holds the rights to Dick Tracy, and as recently as 2023, he was claiming that a sequel movie was in the works. So one of the most interesting things about Dick Tracy to me is 1, how weird it is, and 2, that it's essentially Warren Beatty working through his intimacy issues and deciding to leave the bachelor life behind him. For those that don't know, Warren Beatty was a well-known bachelor in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He's been linked to over 100 female celebrities over the years. So Dick Tracy was released in 1990, and then in 1991, Beatty met and fell in love with Annette Bening. The two got married in 1992 and have been together ever since, and even have 4 kids together. Which is interesting when you consider that at its heart, Dick Tracy is really a movie about growing up and settling down and surrounding yourself with with the people who care about you. And it's just really interesting to me that it was Dick Tracy of all movies that helped Beatty work through his issues and decide to settle down, especially when you consider that this movie also stars Madonna, who Warren Beatty was dating throughout all of production, and then the two promptly broke up after the movie was released. So anyway, in December of 1988, after Dick Tracy had been kicking around development hell for the better part of 15 years, Warner Brothers released a trailer for their upcoming summer tentpole, Batman, which shook all of Hollywood to its core. A new era was here, and this was the catalyst that finally got Disney to take Dick Tracy out of development hell and get the cameras rolling. And in February of 1989, Dick Tracy went into production with Warren Beatty starring and directing and working with his longtime cinematographer Vittorio Storaro, and a cast that included Al Pacino, Madonna, Mandy Patinkin, Paul Sorvino, Dick Van Dyke, Dustin Hoffman, and James Caan. And then, on June 15th, 1990, Dick Tracy was released into the world, and it did pretty okay. Roger Ebert even gave it 4 out of 4 stars. And on its $46 million budget, the movie grossed a worldwide total of nearly $163 million, which isn't a smash hit by any means, but it certainly wasn't a flop either. In reading some reviews for Dick Tracy when it first came out, it seems like the general consensus was that the art direction, matte paintings, and cinematography all elevated it to another level far above its more bare-bones screenplay. Alright, now that all of the background is done, let's talk about this fucking movie. There's honestly a lot to love about Dick Tracy. I've already talked a little bit about the color palette, but this movie opens loudly announcing that it's going to look a little different than most movies. This opening shot and sequence, I think, do a really great job of setting audience expectations of the visual language of the movie. Like, we open on the shot of Dick Tracy's gun, badge, and watch laid out before his radio with red trim, and then the camera tilts up to show us the radio in front of a wall that is also a deep red. No pattern, just red. And then we cut to a wide and see Dick Tracy leaving his apartment, and then the camera shows us the first beautiful matte painting of the movie, and all of this is telling us, hey, this movie's going to look and feel a little different. The shot composition alone feels like something straight from the pages of the comic strip, and that was fully Beatty's intention. His shots feel like panels, but panels where people live and move and breathe. As far as the plot of this movie goes, honestly, it's really not all that deep, and not much happens in it. This is a movie that's almost entirely about the aesthetics and vibes. That being said, we pretty much immediately meet the kid, played by Charlie Korsmo, who would go on to be in Hook, one of my favorite Spielberg movies, and Can't Hardly Wait. And I was curious when making this video, so I pulled up his IMDb, and wouldn't you know it, he took a 20-year break from acting to become a lawyer and law professor before coming back in 2018 to be in 2 movies, both directed by his friend Aaron Schimberg, which are Chained for Life and A Different Man, both of which I still need to see. Now, where was I? Oh right, the movie. Okay, so we meet the kid, and he sees a group of truly insane-looking thugs gunned down by 2 more insane-looking thugs, including my favorite thug in the entire movie, Flat Top. And they leave a message for Tracy on the wall in bullet holes. It's pretty fucking sick. Anyway, Tracy tracks down the kid as a witness and ends up kinda sorta adopting him with his girlfriend Tess Trueheart, played flawlessly by Glenn Headley. And she's clearly ready for Tracy to settle down with her, but also knows how seriously he takes his career, and after years of them being together, it's almost like she's given up hope that he'll ever be ready to settle down. We're also quickly introduced to Madonna's breathless Mahoney and Paul Sorvino's lips manless, who is quickly tricked by our main baddie, Alphonse Big Boy Caprice, and ends up taking a cement bath before being dropped into the river, which leaves Big Boy now in charge of Lips's club, and I guess he also gets Madonna in the deal. Okay, let's pause real quick and talk about Al Pacino as Big Boy for just a minute. First of all, this makeup is fucking incredible. And second, Pacino's performance here is like really strong. I mean, he was nominated for an Oscar for this role. Honestly, it kind of feels like he just dialed up Tony Montana a bit and leaned into his Italian accent instead of the bad Cuban accent he has in Scarface. Look, don't come at me in the comments. We all know he had no business playing a Cuban refugee. Also, isn't it kind of interesting that Big Boy is based on Al Capone and Capone's nickname was Scarface? So that means Pacino has done 2 completely different versions of essentially the same character, but I digress. Okay, this is also where we're introduced to Dustin Hoffman as Mumbles, and while his makeup may not be as insane as the other mobsters, I fucking love his performance in this movie, and I just wanted to make sure I called that out because he's just a fun, silly character. Okay, so anyway, Big Boy takes over Lips's club and is trying to take over all the organized crime in the city, and we get this great scene of him teaching Breathless and several dancers a new routine for the club, and the whole sequence is hilarious and grotesque. Like, I just love how hard Al Pacino threw himself into this character and dialed it up to 11. And this is where Dick Tracy and Breathless Mahoney meet, but the sexual tension between these two is palpable. Remember how I said these two were dating at the time of filming? Then we're treated to a nice little montage of Tracy, Tess, and the kid. And I love how the kid keeps asking, And we get to see this nice little trio of a family begin to form. Really, this whole little montage is so wholesome and fun, and I think really does show that at this time Beatty was beginning to mature a little bit. Like, you can kind of see the gears working in his brain and being like, being a family is kind of fucking awesome. Why don't I want my own family again? Anyway, then we get what is one of my favorite scenes of the movie. Big Boy Caprice has assembled all of the other mobsters in the city, and I mean, again, just look at this fucking set design and makeup. It's fucking incredible. But this whole scene kind of reminds me of the Five Families scene from The Godfather, which is ironic considering we've got Al Pacino and Jimmy Caan in the scene. And basically this scene plays out exactly how you'd expect. Big Boy tells everyone what's up. Most everyone falls in line. Jimmy Caan doesn't and leaves, and his car blows up. So anyone that was thinking about not falling in line is now thinking twice. And with that out of the way, Big Boy now controls the entire city. Like I said earlier, this movie is fairly light on plot and story. From here, it's a back and forth of Big Boy trying to get Tracy out of the picture and Tracy doing his best to overcome everything Big Boy throws at him, but not before we're introduced to our secondary antagonist of the movie, No Face, who I have to imagine was a big influence on Steve Ditko when he created The Question for DC in the 60s, but I couldn't really find any concrete proof of this, so if you know anything about it, let me know in the comments. But anyway, No Face is a really interesting character because we're not really sure what their plan is, but we know they're shady. No Face exists primarily to play the two different sides against one another in an attempt to take over the criminal underworld for themselves. They frame Dick Tracy for murder, they frame Big Boy for kidnapping, and they want to seize power for themselves. And at the end of the movie, it's revealed that No Face has been Breathless Mahoney the entire time. And I think this is actually a really clever reveal, especially when you consider that Breathless is in love with Tracy, who has complicated feelings himself, but he knows his heart will always really belong to Tess, even though she catches him making out with Breathless, and that sucks, and he kisses her again at the end.
Boo this man!
So at the end of the day, Big Boy dies, No Face dies, and Dick Tracy gets the girl and the kid who's now going as Dick Tracy Jr. And I just love how this movie ends with Tracy fumbling over asking Tess to marry him as he's trying to leave and catch some bank robbers, and he just kind of throws her the ring box before walking out the door. Just feels pitch perfect for what this movie actually is. Like I said earlier, the movie is fairly light on plot and story. It really does feel like a comic strip that way. Every 15 minutes or so, there's a cliffhanger of some sort, and then we move on to the next section of the story. But what really makes this movie shine is the look of it. Like I said earlier, there aren't any other movies that look like Dick Tracy. From shot composition to the lighting to set decoration and makeup, there just aren't any other movies I can think of that went the extra mile to create something that felt so otherworldly, yet of our world. I mentioned Sin City earlier, and I do think that's probably the closest we've gotten to something like Dick Tracy, but again, so much of Sin City's backdrop is computer generated that when you put the two movies side by side, it's not even close. Dick Tracy blows it out of the water as far as looks goes. So 35 years later, what is the legacy of Dick Tracy? Well, I think it's largely forgotten. There hasn't been any attempt at a reboot because Warren Beatty still holds the rights and insists he's going to make a sequel. But I think for the folks that remember Dick Tracy, they remember it fondly. Even if they didn't love the movie, I bet they still think of the way it looks from time to time. I know I still do. Like I said, prior to working on this video, I hadn't seen this movie in at least 25 years. So it was almost like seeing it again for the first time. And I will think about some of the shots in this movie for as long as I live because they're just that cool and memorable. Now, as far as Warren Beatty still holding the rights to the character and wanting to make a sequel, since 1990, he has made 2 short specials with Turner Classic Movies. One in 2010, although it was shot in 2008, and one in 2023. Both of them, he comes in, he plays Dick Tracy, and is weirdly interviewed by Leonard Maltin. All of this is just to ensure that Warren Beatty can hang on to the rights just a little bit longer. Well, Warren Beatty is currently 88 years old, and while he seems to be in good health, I do wonder if he'll be able to finally pump out that sequel before his time on this earth comes to an end. What do you guys think? Would you be interested in a Dick Tracy sequel starring a nearly 90-year-old Warren Beatty? Would you like a reboot? Or should we just leave Dick Tracy be and leave this wonderfully strange movie as his final cinematic legacy? Let me know in the comments. I've been Brandon from Born to Rant, and if you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching. It truly means the world. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We release new videos covering all things nerdy every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.